I'm Ron Galatolo. I'm the Chancellor for the San Mateo County Community College District. And of course, in our district, Skyline College falls as one of those colleges. Thank you very much, and I want to welcome you on behalf of our Board of Trustees coming out here today. As you can see, we have a very esteemed panel behind me, and they will be addressing you very shortly. But I want to introduce somebody very special here today, a very dear friend, a longtime colleague, and a person who I've really enjoyed working with over the years. We are truly blessed to have in our midst an individual who is serving her 6th term in Congress. Before that, she's dedicated her life to public service, starting as a supervisor. Also, she was a member of both the Assembly and the Senate. She has been a tireless supporter of women's rights. She has been a tireless supporter of issues around housing. She has been there as a steadfast advocate for individuals who are most marginalized and vulnerable members of our community. You know, it's important to recognize that among her many accomplishments and recognitions, recently Newsweek recognized her as the top 150th most fearless women in the world.
I do love that one.
I know, there's nothing better than that one.
Now, for those who know her as I do, I would say that she's the top 10 fearless women in the world. As I say, she's been serving in Congress for 6 terms in a very distinguished capacity, but she's also on the Intelligence as well as Armed Services Committee. She's been very impactful on those 2 committees. She has been a tremendous supporter and advocate of us in our community college district and public education in our community in general. And it is truly, truly an honor to introduce a very dear friend and amazing colleague, Congresswoman Jackie Speier.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm pretty impressed, I know all of my colleagues are too, that you went through that storm out there to come here this afternoon when you could have been out shopping or something, I guess. But in any case, we thank you all for joining us this afternoon. A special thank you to Ron Galatolo, who's the Chancellor of the Community College District and who once again has made Skyline College available to us to host one of our town halls. And it's fitting that he introduced me because we're talking about housing today, and he has single-handedly convinced a community college district board and the surrounding communities at all 3 of our community colleges to build housing for faculty and staff. Tell me how many units you have now?
Well, we're in the process of building 30 additional ones. We'll have about over 160, but our goal is to actually build 3 more on top of that. So we're looking at having upwards of 400 units.
Okay, upwards of 400 units on these college campuses. And let me tell you, when I went out to visit at CSM, these are beautiful townhomes with huge community centers, and at CSM they've got this gorgeous view of the bay. And what makes this remarkable is that they're offering these townhomes to their faculty and staff for 50% of fair market rental rates. So it's a way of attracting and it's a way of retaining great faculty and staff. That was done because of a vision. And part of what we're going to talk about today is another vision, how we can find ways of dealing with this housing crisis that is becoming immoral and do something about it. So we've got this fabulous panel, which I will introduce momentarily, but we also have a lot of elected officials in the audience, so I'd like for all of you to say a warm welcome to the Mayor of San Bruno, Rico Medina. There, where are you, Carrie? And Michael Salazar, San Bernardino City Councilman. Are you here, Michael? All right. From Burlingame, the Vice Mayor, Emily Beach. Emily? From San Mateo, Council Member Rick Bonilla. From the town of Hillsborough, Mayor Sean Christensen. Also from Hillsborough, Councilwoman Marie Schwang. From the city of Burlingame, Mayor Donna Colson.
Maybe you can speak to just like the three numbers, like put them under.
From the city of Brisbane, Councilmember Karen Cunningham.
And I can just reference you to specific projects. If you can do that, and I can talk about it later as a meeting.
Also from the city of Brisbane, Councilmember Cliff Lenz.
Look at that.
And from the city of Burlingame, Councilmember Ann Keegren. From the city of Half Moon Bay, Councilmember Deborah Penrose. I apologize that these aren't quite in order. Let me now welcome Elizabeth Burdell from Pacifica School District School Board Trustee. And Dennis McBride from the Redwood City School District as well. And then from the Peninsula Healthcare District, Director and Vice Chair Helen Galligan. She's over there. All right. And Pam Frizella, former Foster City Councilwoman. And former council member from the city of Pacifica, Sue DeGree. All right, thank you all for being here. Let me give a shout out to the Community College District staff who have helped make this happen. A special thank you to Mitch Bayley, who always is there for us, and Josh Harris, who is the theater director here, and also Linda Bertolotti, Fiona O'Neill, Brendan O'Neill, and Annie Trin. Let's thank them very much. Did I forget anybody? Yes. From the city of Pacifica, Sue, I can never say your last, Vadolas, sorry, I apologize. Anyone else? Okay, today we are continuing our town hall conversations about America, and the title of this one is A Robust Economy and a Housing Crisis. What are the solutions? We're going to be speaking about two opportunities within our communities to address the sky-high costs of housing in our area. First, there are some faith organizations that have taken underutilized properties at churches and synagogues as part of their faith mission, and as a way to sustain themselves financially, they have developed these lands, turning what is unused land into something that is going towards a very appropriate purpose, and also helping to pay the bills as well. Second, we'll examine the use of publicly owned property at the site of the former Peninsula Hospital. This land is owned by the Peninsula Healthcare District, which means it's owned by the taxpayers of northern San Mateo County. It's important to point out that other publicly owned sites also exist. We talked recently about the Community College District. There are many school districts and, frankly, cities around our county that have surplus land or land that is not used to an optimal level that could, in fact, become candidates for housing. This past week, an important meeting chaired by County Superintendent Nancy McGee was held at the County Office of Education. School districts and cities are exploring ways to develop their underutilized properties for their own personnel. This, to me, is a no-brainer. If we are going to retain our teachers, we're going to have to find a way to provide them housing that they can afford, or we're going to lose them. And I think we recognize that. I also know that you probably know that many of our cities, our first responders, are now living in RVs in the parking lots because, again, the cost of housing is so high. So, lots for us to look at and talk about today, and I hope that we will do our best to come up with some solutions. I want to point out that for many of these areas that the rents, much like for the community college district, can be cut in half. And that makes a huge difference to people that have high priorities in our communities, people we value very much, but oftentimes are not being in a position to pay for the kinds of housing that are in our neighborhoods. So we're going to be looking at all of these. We have a number of experts. They're on the far side, and I'm going to briefly introduce them to you. On the far end is Ken Cole. He is the County Housing Director. He came to San Mateo County about 5 years ago and was from Santa Cruz County, and before that was known as an expert on homelessness. Seated next to him is Dennis Zell. He is one of the directors of the Peninsula Healthcare District and will be able to respond to questions about the parcel of land that they're looking at and how it could be developed. Reverend Katie Goetz from the Woodside Road United Methodist Church, and next to her is Linda Mandolini, is the Executive Director and President of Eden Housing. She served as President of Eden Housing for 16 years with prior positions as Director of Real Estate Development and Project Developer. And then we hear from Sister Amy Bayley, who is the Vice President of Community Planning at Mercy Housing. She's been leading Mercy Housing's Community Planning Division for over 15 years. From the inception of a development, she's worked with the housing developer to determine a community planning process for the specific community. And besides that, you need to know that before Sister Amy Bayley was a sister, she was a classmate of mine at Mercy High School in Burlingame. Don't you love it? I love it. All right, next is Nevada Merriman. She's the Director of Housing Development at MidPen Housing. Nevada has contributed to the development of more than 1,000 affordable homes. As Director of Housing Development for Silicon Valley, she leads MidPen's Silicon Valley and Peninsula Real Estate Development team and oversees a pipeline of construction across the counties of Santa Clara and San Mateo. So I think that is everyone from that side of the panel. And then everyone on this side of the panel, if you don't know who they are, you're not a voter. To my immediate left is the Speaker Pro Tem of the State Assembly and Assemblyman Kevin Mullin. Welcome, Kevin. But more importantly, his twin sons are here, and if they're in the audience, I want them to take a bow. They may be in the back. Are they in the back? You don't know where they are. See, it's like a father. He doesn't know where they are. But anyway, they're now 16 months, and they're pretty darn cute.
They are.
Next to him is our state senator, Jerry Hill.
Thank you,
Please
Jerry.
welcome Jerry. And then we're joined by two of our county supervisors, Dave Pine and Don Horsley. All right, with that, I'm going to sit down and join the group, and we will start the process. So I want to give our electeds an opportunity to say a few words if they would like. I'll start with Kevin, if you have something you'd like to add to this conversation.
Do that. Thank you very much, Congresswoman Speier, for this convening and for your leadership on this and so many issues. As was mentioned, I'm Kevin Mullin, proud to represent San Mateo County in the California State Assembly. My district, the 22nd district, includes San Bruno and Skyline, as well as the Peninsula Healthcare District properties, which will be a topic of conversation. Just some very brief remarks. I wanted to note that collaboration is and will continue to be key in the multitude of efforts that will be required to properly address the housing shortage in San Mateo County and around the state. In particular, I look forward to learning about how collaboration can be leveraged to develop more affordable housing, actually produce more units in this county. I did want to mention, with this in mind, I wanted to share very briefly two measures that I authored which became law, legislation to create what are called affordable housing authorities, which are tax increment financing in local governments. Not a restoration of what is called redevelopment, but it is a tool for local governments to fund affordable housing, as well as streamlining the process for school districts to develop teacher housing. We are not circumventing, that's the wrong word in politics. We are streamlining the surplus land process, which speeds developments. They still have to go through a local land use planning process, but it's a tool that our school districts are using. So with that in mind, I also want to mention AB 738 is a measure that was held. They're called two-year bills, but this is an important housing measure for San Mateo County, which would set aside construction funds for the construction of affordable housing to be allocated more effectively within San Mateo County, a sharing of what are called RHNA funds, Regional Housing Need Allocation dollars. These cities have to meet those RHNA obligations. It's a way to provide some flexibility when it comes to the funding of affordable housing. So I'll be working on that in 2020. So looking forward to learning from our distinguished panel about how to make affordable housing a reality in San Mateo County, how I might continue to be part of that solution. And I'm hoping we get focused on what is called the missing middle. Those are folks that are largely middle class, don't qualify for below market rate, but simply can't afford market rate units. And that is a particularly acute problem here in San Mateo County. And I'll just wrap up very briefly with a quick anecdote. Members of my staff recently attended a groundbreaking for the MidPen housing development in Redwood City. On the program are 7 funders listed. This demonstrates the very collaborative nature of funding these projects and the complexity that underlies bringing projects to reality. The very nature of this process is similar really to transportation projects, where you have multiple funding streams, multiple agencies, in some cases public and private partnerships to make funding projects a reality. In this case, it was the City of Redwood City, the County of San Mateo, California Department of Housing and Community Development, the state level, California Debt Limit Allocation Committee, and California Tax Credit Allocation Committee, so tax credits were part of the funding. Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco, and Union Bank, the private funders and investors in the project. So it just points to the very nature and the complexity of bringing these things to reality. And we have a panel of experts here who will talk about that complexity and how we in the public sector can help. So thank you very much for the opportunity. And with that, I believe I'll turn it over to our distinguished state senator.
Thank you very much, Assemblymember Mullin. And thank you to Congresswoman Speier for her leadership and for really bringing us together on this very critical and important topic today. I mean, there's nothing more important, there's no greater need, and there's no better time than today for us to deal with this, discuss it, and then have some action steps to make it happen. And I appreciate the collaboration that we've seen in this county to make this happen at its best and the partnerships that we have. But most importantly, we have to now think out of the box and look for those opportunities, look for that land and those development potential spots and locations in our county to provide that housing that's necessary. So thank you again, looking forward to the discussion.
All right, next, Dave Pine.
You know, I moved to the Bay Area in 1985, and I remember being shocked by the housing prices. Like, you want $250,000 for that? Now I just wish I had bought, a lot of houses. But I have had the privilege of serving on the Board of Supervisors since 2011, and we have really pivoted and focused very intensely on the housing issues. So my colleague, Don Horsley, will speak about that a little bit, and I'll fill in on a couple of projects we've been engaged in. Go ahead, Don.
Well, actually, as Dave says, one of the things that we did we created this thing. Initially, we called it the Job Housing Gap Task Force because we realized that the number of jobs that were being created in this Bay Area, especially in San Mateo County, just dwarfed the number of housing units, and the actual ratio was 24 jobs to every one housing unit. I'm happy to say that we've actually decreased that, so there's 12. It's still a problem because we're still creating 12 jobs to every one housing unit. But we've done sort of, we've really kind of, I think, awakened the need on the part of every single city and as well as the county. And one of the things that we started thinking about is that in order to build more housing, we had to have basically three elements. You had to have political will, you had to have money, and you also had to have land. Now, land is probably turns out to be one of the toughest, but political will is also very difficult for cities as well. And one of the things that we use this terminology called STP, that cities oftentimes are kind of confronted by STP or the same 20 people. And they usually are in opposition. So one of the things that we've started doing is our community conversations with all of the communities. Pacifica's one, Burlingame's another, and I think we've done about 7 or 8 so far. And I think we've got the political will on the part of all of our cities, and we have started to develop that as well as amongst our community residents as well. So in terms of money, the county's put in over about $110 million so far. Not that we build housing, but we actually use that money as seed money for nonprofit developers to build housing. So far, I think we can actually count that we have about 2,000 affordable units that are really directly attributed to that affordable housing fund. And I know in our next budget, and I probably, because we have Supervisor Pine here, so we've got at least 2 votes, so, and I need a third, but I'm sure I think the board is all on board with this, and we're putting in our budget about another $30 million this year, and the following year another 30, so that's another $60 million.
I'm clapping for that.
And I'll stop at that point.
Yeah,
there.
stop with the applause, right? Okay, so our plan is this. We're going to ask our experts a series of questions, and we want you to take as much time as you think appropriate to answer the question and maybe expound from a particular perspective that you want to convey. And then we're going to open it up to questions from the audience, and then the second group of questions will go to the Peninsula Healthcare District. And then, again, the public will have an opportunity to ask questions. So why don't I start off by asking each of you who have been engaged in building with the faith community what some of your successes have been, and when you work with a faith group, do they give up ownership? How does that work? And how do you have to deal with zoning issues? Does it shift from an R1 to an R3? Kind of give us some of the nuts and bolts. You should start. Yeah, you should start.
So for those of you who don't know Eden Housing, we're 51 years old. And we got our start in 1968 through a group of volunteers who came together to work on a ballot initiative that didn't pass. It was for open housing. They didn't give up. They went out, they built some houses, and today we own nearly 10,000 apartments, all of them affordable. And a number of the projects that Eden has done in our history have been in partnership with other nonprofits, both faith-based and other groups that just share our values of wanting to give a home to the people that they're trying to serve. And so the project that we're working on currently is the most complicated faith-based partnership that I personally have ever seen. It's with First Presbyterian Church in Hayward. They own a very large site where they have their church, and they have a child care center, and they have a school, and they have a Trader Joe's, which is their cash cow. It is a very large parcel of land. Trader Joe's cannot go anywhere because A, the community will hunt us down and kill us if we lose the Trader Joe's. But B, they are really a big revenue generator for the parcel. And the church is really committed to this issue. They are about to put 6 tiny homes on one of their parking lot to help homeless people live there, yes. This is an interim solution for them. So we're looking at working with the church to build 150 homes for families. And we're looking at a way to redevelop the site so that we can do that, keep a place for worship, keep the child care center, keep the school, and keep, of course, the Trader Joe's and all the attendant parking that the Trader Joe's needs to run its business so that the church can continue to benefit from that sharing arrangement. And I would say this about this partnership and several others that we've done. We're working with Whistle Stop Senior Services in Marin County to redevelop their site, and they will keep senior services, and we're going to put housing over it. There's a lot of ways to do this, and the first thing you have to figure out is how are you going to split ownership or collectively share ownership. It's very complicated, but my one feeling on this is where there's a will, there's a way. And we have worked very successfully with any numbers of nonprofits, and I believe we'll work successfully with First Pres to come up with a way to solve this problem. And there's a lot of ways for the church to own the land underneath the building that we would build for housing. It's called a ground lease. The church could also divide ownership with us in condominium fashion. So there's a lot of ways for us to do this, and we have to really plan for it. We have to figure out ways to park the people on the weekends who want to drive to the church, but I'm actually increasingly convinced that this is a real opportunity for all of us, and that we all have to really think about ways we can do this. I just want to point to one of the things that Alameda County has done. They just did a $581 million bond issuance in Alameda County, and they have set aside a small pot of money to do technical assistance with faith-based community organizations and nonprofit developers who want to work together to do and solve this problem. And it takes two parties with a shared value set, willing to work together, willing to spend a lot of time communicating with each other, and really working hard to come together to create solutions. For the past 30 years, Eden has partnered also with Glad Tidings Church. They have been a partner in a neighborhood where we jointly did a community development plan. We bought buildings, they bought buildings, we've bought buildings from them. They work with our residents on services, they volunteer with us in our properties. It really is a good relationship, but it's a relationship. And so I would encourage all of the faith-based groups to think about, if you have an asset that you can use, there's many examples, not just here in California, but nationally, of ways to use this land, because land, having a place to build is so hard in a place like San Mateo County. The land is crazy expensive. The last piece of land we've bought in Silicon Valley was $12 million an acre. I'm not joking. I know you're going, an acre, right? So if you, a church, have land, you have a real asset that you can really put to work and contribute to these kinds of projects. We have the most complicated board outside. Dixie on my team is here. If you have specific questions, I'm sure she'd be happy to talk to you outside in the lobby that would describe this to you. But if you're really interested in this, I'm sure there's ways to do it, and I'm sure all three of us would be able to talk to you about how to help make that happen.
Thanks, Linda, for your story. I'm Nevada Merriman with MidPen, and I wanted to bring up an example that wasn't in the county, but it's the most recent one that opened its doors, and I really like it when the job is completely done and we can let folks know how is the property really functioning in the community. And I can say that the neighborhood is really not impacted at all. So it's the people that are congregants there embrace it, because it was really from this, starting from this point of a shared value, that there was even the idea or thought to study the site. And the adjacent neighbors are happy to have additional folks in the neighborhood. In this case, it's in Santa Cruz. We worked with St. Stephen's Lutheran Church, and we did work with the county in that case to provide acquisition funding through a ground lease. So this particular church, like many churches, had a lot of land, but not really enough to really grow investments in some of the ways that they wanted to do to preserve their own financial future. So the 99-year ground lease structure worked very well for them, because they can retain long-term ownership. And then they can also get paid for this asset that they have and put that money to work, because there are now 40 homes for seniors there. So we're very proud of that example. We've worked with other churches. We work in 12 counties. And we most recently, I almost hesitate to bring this up, but I would love to say that we most recently studied a site with the Congregational Church in San Mateo, And that one didn't quite work out, mostly because we needed to rebuild the structured parking, and it was about a half-acre site. However, I love that they felt that they could approach us with the idea. I loved that the congregation was really excited to try to do something just to make a difference right away in their own backyard. And it's been a wonderful activity and strengthening a lot of relationships with people in the city of San Mateo. So I bring that up because I think that the city of San Mateo and many cities in this county kind of have a San Mateo way, and a lot of smart people that can try to figure out if something can be done. And nothing ventured, nothing gained. So we'd like to take a look at more sites like that.
Thank you. And I have so many examples, but I have a gone but not forgotten file. Inevitably, 5 years later, oh, the brothers in Montebello, now they want to talk again. It's fine. Things take a long time, and sometimes they ripen, and then they get better, but they start somewhere, and even if it's a no at that moment, don't be discouraged. It's just, this is a long process. Things take 5 to 6 years, and that's when it's racing forward, just telling you all. It's a slow process because it's so complex. So Mercy Housing goes back a ways. It was founded by a bunch of nuns. In 1981, 6 groups of nuns got together. This one sister convinced her community that housing was a huge issue in 81, and that they should give her $500,000 to help solve this problem. And so they did, which is, I think, even more funny. They wrote her a check for $500,000, and then she started gathering people around to say, how are we going to do this? And that's how Mercy Housing started. So we still kind of do that. We have a lot of relationships because we go back faith-based. But I would agree also, well, with everybody, but with Linda, there are so many opportunities for values-related groups. There are churches, there are, congregations of men and women who are getting smaller and smaller, and all of you know somebody in one of those congregations. Those places have land. They have mother houses, et cetera. So down in Orange, we are just now starting construction. The Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange, who are also up here, but their mother house is in Orange. It started up in Ferndale, and the nun realized it was too cold and nobody would ever enter, so they moved it to Orange County. I think that's a funny story. Anyway, it's true. So the sisters have been making plans for their 13 acres. USF is doing a college program for adults for nursing, for night school, and their old mother house, which is historic, which is challenging, but it's beautiful, is going to be 60 units for seniors who have experienced homelessness. Wow. And we start construction next month. It's been in process for 4 or 5 years, but as an example, they will keep the land, they will keep the ownership of the building, but we will develop the housing for them and then manage it. So I think there are huge opportunities. So Mercy Housing in the 90s was very connected to the Catholic Archdiocese of San Francisco. Catholic Charities did a little bit of housing until it got too complicated, and they were wise. I mean, they basically got out of the real estate business. So we have a long relationship with the Archdiocesan Real Estate Department. And this idea of working with values-based groups goes way back. St. Andrew's right here in Daly City, Good Shepherd Parish over in Pacifica, those have senior housing developments on them that have been there for 20 years. This is like an old story that we need to bring back. We're just finishing on the cemetery, Colma. Is anybody here from Colma?
Dead.
The city with
Anyone dead from Colma?
17 souls above ground. I know a lot about Colma. You got to get to know everything. The Historic Society, there's the old pump building. It's a triangular site. It's unused by the cemetery. It's right across from all the auto body shops. It's going to be 75 units for veterans who have experienced homelessness. The VA is going to provide health care services there and case management. The mayor really wanted, she's a Mercy graduate, she really wanted a dog run. We're going to have a dog run and a community garden, but that is an example of working with, again, values-based, even though we pay for the land. St. Anthony's in San Francisco, I'm just going to give you 2 more examples because that gets people thinking sometimes. We can go into how to structure it. It's easy. I would agree with Linda. When there's a will, there's a way. We can do it. St. Anthony's Dining Room. You all know St. Anthony's Dining Room. Long history, fabulous service in the Tenderloin. They were going to redo their dining room. So it was 3 floors. And they went to the city of San Francisco. City of San Francisco said, great, everybody loves you. It's a huge waste of space, vertical space, in that part of town. So think about something else. So they put out, I don't know if we competed or not, but basically they came to us and we developed 92 units for senior housing above the new St. Anthony's. So that is a good story about the fact that they own it. It's condoized, as Linda mentioned. And then there's 92 units of housing above, and it is a fabulous opportunity where seniors are volunteering. It's very exciting. So I think those are my main examples. But, put your nickel in. We'll just keep talking.
I just want to comment quickly on the zoning question. This is really a local control question, and we've found in almost every instance when we've approached the council and the staff at the localities together, that there's actually been a lot of support. So the question of, is it R1 or is it going to be something else? A lot of the cities now are redoing their specific plans and really thinking about where are the opportunities to intensify and build housing. And I think if you're in a decent location to do this, and you have the kind of public support that we have right now, the need is so urgent that you can make that happen. And you may have to do what's called a general plan amendment, but if you have good political will and your entire congregation turns out to tell these guys to vote yes, then it usually helps us get that done. So I think you can rezone. I hate when zoning is the obstacle. I think that's almost like a red herring. If you really want to do it and you have a thoughtful plan and you've worked with the city and you've worked with the partners, you can come up with a way to get this work done.
Okay. Reverend Goetz, I was under the impression you had some questions. Is that right?
I think they got a number of them answered, but one of the questions that I know comes up when churches talk about this is, who lives there? Church projects, I think, have been derailed in the past because the way tax credits come through, can our members live there? Who lives there? How do rents get determined? And what are the models out there for building housing that extend beyond the federal tax credit piece? I know the community college did it through a bond measure. So what are some of the funding strategies that folks have used?
What they did, there's certificates of participation out of bond measure. Actually, if I'm correct, and Chancellor, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the community college district used COPs, which are certificates of participation, and I don't think you would call them bonds. Right?
Oh, it was not a bond. Okay, somebody had told me it was a bond measure.
Wasn't.
Okay.
So I'm just going to address the question of how the three of us finance most of our housing. We do it with this program called the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. Congresswoman, thank you so much for going to bat for this program all the time, and to the state for having a companion program that also funds this group. We use that program because it generates a significant amount of equity to serve the folks that, when we look at the need, are in the most dire need. So they typically make between 30 and now 80% of the area median income. There was a recent change to the federal law to allow us to do income averaging, because I think one of the challenges we've had here in high-cost areas is that the tax credit used to top out at 60% of AMI, which here for a family of four is probably closing in close to $100,000 for a family of four. And we would always see these families that were just this much too high to live in our housing. And then in the last budget round, when the tax credit got increased, they actually expanded our ability to serve folks between 60 to 80% of a median income. And that's been very helpful to us, but because of those restrictions, you have to qualify, and so you have to have enough money to pay rent. We often work with the County Housing Authority, who gives us housing vouchers so that we can subsidize people's ability to pay rent. And I'll tell you, I don't know about both of you, but the last project we opened, we had 90 units. We got 5,000 applications. So it's standing room only to live in this kind of housing. The rents are targeted as a percentage of the median income, and they range on the low end from about $500 a month to for the high end to be just under $1,500 for, and that would buy you a 3-bedroom, essentially rent you a 3-bedroom.
1,500 would buy you what?
A 3-bedroom.
A
unit,
3-bedroom
yeah,
unit? Wow.
With 1.5 or 2 bathrooms. So it's definitely way below market. Assemblymember Mullin referenced the missing middle. This is sort of the holy grail for all of us right now, trying to figure out how to solve for that group. And the reason the tax credit has been so valuable to us is because it gives us equity to build. We're in the highest construction cost part of the country right now, and having equity that writes down our building costs is really important. We don't have anything that does that for the missing middle, although the governor's budget has now a proposal to start funding some of that through Cal HFA and also through the state tax credit program. So I think the state sees the challenge, and there's a couple of pieces coming through. I don't know if you want to address some of that. That might help us solve that more in the middle. We also need a whole bunch of other sources of funding from the local government and the federal government. Home, CDBG have made a big difference, and they add even more layers of complication onto who we serve. So Nevada, you want to add any more?
Well, I would just add that it can be both. We've looked at a variety of concepts where we had a portion of the units would be privately funded so that we could potentially allow something different than a wait list that would pass all of the fair housing standards and everything like that. So it is a challenge for many communities to get behind, that it's going to need to be, that we're going to need to have an affirmative marketing plan, that we're going to need to make sure that there's a adequate chance for everybody to apply. But I think that in some cases, if you have enough land and when there's a will, there's a way, that you could potentially have a portion of the units that isn't subject to that. So that was something that we've been looking at because there are some very strong advocacy groups out there that are interested in building for their own. A good example of that would be parents of developmentally disabled children. So that's one of the strongest groups around. A very passionate, lifelong group of people, and they want to make sure their kids will get a spot because they are investing sometimes decades into getting something built. So I think that has some potential, and not to get discouraged right off the bat. I do really like the community college models here. I think that it's so creative. I mean, and if it's not, perhaps it isn't obvious, but the ability for those districts, they don't pay taxes, so that helps with the way the projects pencil quite a bit. They also know exactly how much they pay their employees, so it takes out some of the guesswork of what developers have to do in terms of figuring out what the market is. When you can do a survey and study exactly who needs the housing and build to suit, I mean, that, my friends, is an amazing thing. So I really would like to see more employers use that, do the surveys, and try to figure out what would be something that would really be a benefit and allow their employees to have the stability. Because I know that program also, after about 7 or 9 years, it's expected that you've saved some money and can go and try to buy a home, be a homeowner, and that they're successful in that. So I really think that those are a lot of key components that people should be thinking about.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think the question, though, about who will live there is the very good indicator of the kind of expertise that any values-based group that wants to work with a developer should gain, either with a consultant that will stand with you and help you understand the process, or the kind of work that we've talked about where you're working with a group. Half of the time you're working with them isn't structuring a deal, it's walking through what the process is so that there are no surprises, so it's very clear what you're getting involved in so that it's a positive experience. And sometimes just having someone else as part of your team, not that there's any antipathy, just your team saying, no, MidPen is telling you the truth, or they're explaining this correctly, so that somebody doesn't feel, because it's a power situation. It's a very small congregation and a very large developer. There's an inequality of power there, and there's a very standard response of thinking, oh, they're not telling me everything, or there's something I don't get. And there is a ton that you don't get. And so you want to build in, it's a little over nervous making maybe, but you want to build in that expertise or someone that you can trust to help you be in the process constructively and so that there are no surprises. We typically work out kind of an MOU with a values-based group just to spell out what kinds of things we're going to have to talk about and how we'll talk about them. And a very good friend at HUD many years ago said those MOUs are the hardest because you're usually talking about how you're going to relate. It's a relationship, right? You're going to talk about how you're going to relate if things go bad and you don't have a relationship yet. It's like talking about the divorce before the prenups. It's very odd, but it's worth the investment of time. It's just what you got to do, and then the relationship flourishes, is what I would say. The clarity is what helps it, though.
All right, what we're going to do now is any of the electeds that want to ask questions, and then we're going to have Ken Cole kind of tell us what it's like in San Mateo County, what the needs are, and then we're going to ask you to ask any questions of the experts, and then we're going to move to the Peninsula Healthcare District property, okay? And I think Kevin had a question, and so did Dave.
A quick question, I think, for Sister Amy. You talk about the opportunities for values-related groups and organizations, but you've been talking a lot about sort of the inner workings and the mechanics of putting a project together. I'm curious about the public acceptance of projects when they are backed by a Mercy Housing or a nonprofit entity versus a private developer that comes. Does the public make a distinction in their mind about really who is behind a project, who's at the top of the letterhead? I mean, there was an example in Redwood City of resistance to a Habitat for Humanity project, a very small Habitat for Humanity project of all things. So, but is it easier to gain acceptance and resonance with the neighborhood about the need for a project depending on who is really behind it?
Having never been a for-profit developer, I have no point of comparison. But I will tell you that you have to work hard. You just have to work hard to be responsive to the community, to be out there asking people what they think, to change the design if it's needed or modify it to the extent you can for people to feel heard. In some ways, I think we have a harder job because we really want to pay attention to the community and respond. And I can't tell you how many people in terms of this world of housing for persons who have experienced homelessness who are looking at us as a demon. You know, you're gonna destroy my neighborhood. And so what it takes is having some other properties for people to go visit to say, oh, this is what you mean, and you go, yes. You know, for the people that are thoughtful, that look into it, that look at your track record, that go see properties where the property values have gone up, you're in good shape being a nonprofit. But I would say that we have to work very, very hard to win people's trust and to get to the next step.
I just want to add to that. Several of you probably know Ash Kalra, who is now in the Assembly, but was a council member in San Jose, and he worked with us in a neighborhood with one of the most expensive, it was one of the most expensive neighborhoods in South San Jose, and we were going to build a new affordable housing development. And he actually, as a council member, came with us to the first meeting and said, we're going to have a process. I haven't made up my mind, but I'm sure that we need this. And we are going to work with the developer to figure out what it is they're going to do, what it is we need for our community, and we are going to go through this process together. They testified, that homeownership association, on our behalf. We had zero opposition. And I would say you can never underestimate the value of a good local process and good local leadership. It's really hard right now. There's a lot of traffic in this universe, and everybody, whether you're for-profit or nonprofit, you're generating cars, and that's causing agita, or your kids are going to a school, and that's causing challenges. And I think it requires a lot of leadership, patience, and willingness on the part of all of us to make room for other people, and some work to really think about how do you mitigate people's concerns realistically, and how do you get local leaders who have the courage to vote yes when they've got 200 homeowners standing in an audience saying, I don't want you to do this. And people want to be reelected, and we need people to be reelected who vote yes for this. So I think we've had a lot of show me a hero moments at Eden in the last few years, where council members have literally had their children threatened in their school because they wanted to vote yes for us. And so it's not easy. And so all of you in the audience, if you care about this, you should give people cover and help us. So I think the opposition, it's a little easier sometimes for us because people see us as providing something that maybe the for-profits aren't doing, but it's lately it's been kind of just challenging a lot.
All right, I'm going to ask that we kind of shorten the answers because we've got a whole room full that would like to ask questions too.
Okay, I will just add that MidPen, and I believe Eden and Mercy, it's the same, that we manage the communities that we develop. And that makes a big difference. Sometimes I have council members say, I don't want to see your newest property, take me to an old one. And sometimes folks will say, oh, I didn't ever know this was affordable housing, which is the best when that happens. Because a lot of our communities are just coexisting, and you don't know that they're affordable housing, and I think that offers our residents a lot of dignity. Besides that, if anyone has a problem with the project, they could certainly call me. You know, my name is on the City of San Mateo's website as a project manager 12 years ago. I'm all over there. You could call Matt Franklin. We employ everyone from the maintenance on up. So.
Dave, you have a question?
Yes. And we all know how hard it is to build housing around here, but the challenge with affordable housing is even more compounded. And in my experience, without public land, public land has been the key. Like, for example, the Arroyo Green project that just opened groundbreaking in Redwood City, 117 units. City of Redwood City provided the land. I just went to a ribbon cutting in South City, 81 senior housing units. South City donated the land. Can you achieve deep affordability without public land, or is that pretty much a prerequisite to achieve deep affordability? And Ken, you might have some view on
Ken,
that.
why don't you answer that?
We pay for the land, whether it's the city's public land or the Sisters St. Joseph Orange public land, privately owned land. So I don't,
This land was donated. It was given to the
Well,
developer for
you're
free.
Free land is better, and it's best.
Yeah, free land.
So anybody who has that, I mean, that's a critical component in the case of Arroyo Green because it's 117 apartments, but there's really 99 different flavors of vouchers on there. So we're reaching some of the very most vulnerable, hardest to serve, including 10 HUD-VASH. So in that particular case, if you want to go really deep, I think that that free land's the best. But it's not insurmountable, and the county, thanks to your leadership and other people here, have a tremendous amount of resources that they can deploy flexibly. And I'd like to think that we could overcome it if we needed to.
All right, Ken,
Well, I'll start with
tell us how big the problem is.
how big the
Tell us where
problem
the
is. Okay.
greatest need is in San
So
Mateo County.
I'll give just a little bit of quick context from the county's view for what we're all facing. And a lot of this is well known, but for the Department of Housing, where we have both our community development activity and we administer the millions of dollars that our good supervisors have provided through Measure K funding to seed thousands of units of affordable housing in our community. So we administer that in our department along with, we have our housing vouchers through our housing authority, a very important federal subsidy that the Congresswoman has helped fought to keep because we're local agencies, but we're using federal dollars to help subsidize very important projects in our community. But I always want to start, we tend to jump right in as housers into housing and units and financing. And I want to go back just very quickly to that we're talking about people. We're talking about community. We're talking about children. And we're speaking of this in the context of a perverse housing market, an upside-down housing market, one of the worst housing markets in the continental United States. So our market is broken. It's not going to provide, even at the high end, the number of units that we really need, and it will certainly not provide at the lower end of economic condition enough units. So we're all called, all of us who represent public agencies, government, special purpose districts. I think the Redwood City project that was just mentioned might have actually started with a piece of water district land in Redwood City, if I recall the story. But it took 25 years to knit together the parcels to do that project. So I would suggest in the storytelling that we remind ourselves that we have to hurry up. We've got to hurry up. And we're all doing great work, but we have to hurry up because there's a lot of people out there in need. So I think all of our special districts are called, and speaking for the Housing Authority, we had a former public housing site in Daly Cities, where we have now partnered with Mid-Peninsula Housing. We're taking 150 units of well cared for but older stock. They're duplexes. They house about 150 families. We're going to bring in tax credit financing through Mid-Peninsula Housing. We're going to use Measure K dollars. We're going to use Housing Authority vouchers, and we're going to get 500 units of housing at that site. And that's a site that we have control of. The second site that the county recently put on the table was a parcel of land that Supervisor Slocum and Horsley managed to get for us in Fair Oaks. And that's a parcel where we're going to take a former recycling site, which has been cleared now, and we're going to build behind a health clinic. We're going to build upwards of 200 units of housing, family housing, with Mercy Housing, our partner, and get a child care site out of that tax credit project. So there's a lot of opportunities out there. But again, speaking of the people we're trying to reach, I looked at it through the context quickly of the healthcare district here. If you look at the homeless count that we did in 2017, the last time we did our homeless count, we just did a new one, but we don't have the statistics yet. So in 2017, in the healthcare district's region, we had a street count of about 141 homeless people in that snapshot one-night count. So in every district, however you were to divide up our county, you're going to find homeless people. You're going to find our poverty rate, which is about 6 to 7% of our population by federal standards, qualify as living at a rate of poverty or below. And that doesn't even speak to our perverse housing market, which causes people to really have empty pockets all the time. And then another number I just throw out that we often refer to is area median income. And area median income is calibrated by the federal government. The statistics come out every year. And the last time in 2018, when these numbers came out, it pegged our that a family of four earning $117,400 would qualify at the high end for housing assistance. Okay, $117,400 for a family of four. My phone rang. It was the New York Times. Okay, and they don't know who I am. So when the New York Times calls, you know you're in trouble. And we're in trouble. So I just say we're doing great work. I think the county, in particular through Measure K and the citizens, have extended that now for 20 years. We have great seed money, and we have a lot of work to do.
Thank you, Ken. All right, questions in the audience? Anyone have questions? We have two microphones, it looks like.
Representative Speier, thank you for this conversation. It's very important. Thus far, what I'm hearing mostly is about building new housing, and I wanted to expand the conversation to the existing housing stock and also to preserving the affordability of housing. According to a report published by the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, if low-income housing was brought up to the national average energy efficiency standards, low-income housing would save 35% on their utility bills. What is it that legislation can do, regulation can do, in order to provide some relief and to improve the efficiency of housing?
I'll just go quickly first. Preservation of housing is something that we all are looking for opportunities to do. I mentioned our hyperactive housing market. Our county has used some of our Measure K funds to help local nonprofits purchase existing stock. I have to say that it's more expensive than anything we've tried doing. So the cost per unit is extremely high. To buy at market rate and preserve stock, which typically needs a great deal of rehabilitation. So you've got a double whammy problem. But I'm looking forward to more opportunities to do that kind of preservation work.
Can I add that we actually have done that, but it's really tough for a government agency to do it because we are really rather slow. We have this process that we have to go through. So what we have done it through, for example, in North Fair Oaks with a Sister Christina, which is, what is it called? St. Francis Center, and we've been able to work with Sister Christina in North Fair Oaks to buy buildings. But one of the things we have seen is that, especially in that area, which is mostly recent immigrants to this country, and there's fairly large apartments, buildings that are really not very well kept up, but they are bought up by people who are expecting to make a fairly quick profit. And so one we've seen, for example, one was sold for $1 million, and then a year later $1.5 million, and a year later $2 million and $3 million. In essence, what happens is it keeps on getting churned. What we said is that this building, they put some minor improvements on it, kick everybody out. So we have been pretty active at trying to buy those buildings, but we have to do it usually through a nonprofit, like, for example, is with the St. Francis Center, and we have done it also in Pacifica, but it is really a very difficult process for local government to do, so we have to get partners on the nonprofit sector to be able to help us to do that.
Okay, we've got a number of people that want to ask questions. We still have a second discussion issue area, so question, if you ask your question, and we're going to get one person to answer on the panel, okay?
Hi, thank you. Thank you for the work you're doing on housing, everyone. So I guess if I only have one question, there's so many. Could I ask it of you, Congresswoman Speier? Would that be all right? What can be done, what kind of legislation can be done on the national level because I feel that this is a symptom of a larger problem which deals with income disparity, growing income disparity in this country. On the one hand, housing's not affordable. On the other hand, the jobs and the wages are not high enough. Is there anything that can be done on the national level?
Well, on a national level, I mean, raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, right now it's at $7.25. So believe it or not, that's the national, is one of the things. What we're trying to do as it relates to housing, though, is retain these Section 8 housing vouchers. We're trying to also argue that because this is such a high-cost area and based on zip codes throughout this county, every one of our zip codes puts us at a level that makes us eligible for tax credits for developers to get 9%, in some cases 4% in another. So those are the mechanisms we can use on a federal level in terms of housing. In terms of income inequality generally, I mean, making sure that everyone has access to health care is a huge component of how we live. So for all of you that may be concerned, the ACA is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. It has to be improved, but it's not going anywhere. Let's move on to the next question, please.
Question for Congresswoman Speier.
You've got experts here. What?
Okay. Yeah, but this
Yes, go
country
ahead.
spends over $600 billion on defense, more than the next 7 countries combined. My question is, how can we allocate that money better for housing rather than the military?
So I serve on the Armed Services Committee. It is a budget proposal now that was at $750 billion. Under the Democrats on the House side, we're trying to lower it to $730. I'm spending all of my time and energy trying to make defense contractors that gouge the taxpayers pay a price for it. We have a number of contractors that are sole source operators, and then they buy sole source companies, and then they are in a position to charge us $1,000 for a part that costs $1.50. So the interest in wanting to retain a position in the world that keeps us both safe and, number one, requires us to have a robust military service. So we have over 1.3 members in our military. They cost money. And then there's a cost associated with them after they've served. They've suffered from PTSD. They're suicidal, and then the VA comes in. So it's very complex. It's not just the defense budget for defending the country. It's providing for our veterans after they have served. So it's probably not coming out of the defense budget, even though it's discretionary. at least under this administration. What's problematic is HUD has basically washed its hands of recognizing its obligation to fund at a level that can help people who are the working poor be able to find housing opportunities. So we need a change of administration for that to happen.
Hi, thank you very much for having this meeting. My wife and I are both public educators, public school teachers. I'm at 34 years, my wife is at 11 years. And when I first started teaching, I was living in my car, I was couch surfing, and I'm lucky enough now to own a home in San Carlos. And becoming aware of Senator Wiener's bill SB 50 and what's going on with that, I became, well, I'm anti-SB 50, but I became a lot more aware of kind of what's been going on. And so I have a couple questions. First of all, it feels like our cities and our communities are under attack when actually the funding for the cities pretty much got cut when Governor Brown took away the redevelopment agencies. And so that was a primary source of funding to create public housing and things like that. And as I researched more, I found that the...
Can you ask a question? There's
yeah,
lots
well,
of people.
Okay. Yes. My question is that the cities seem like they're being blamed. When you look at a company like Google that is bringing in $153 billion per year, and the cities annually combined are bringing in $77.3 billion per year, why isn't the private sector being addressed more to create public housing? Because they have not built one house yet. So I'd like to see us change the paradigm and make that shift and make those companies who are bringing these people in and affecting and impacting our society here
All right,
to
thank
be
you.
responsible. Thank you.
Wait, I think one of our state legislators is going
You know,
to respond.
and you're absolutely correct. And the SB 50 issue is not gone. It will come back as when some of the tweaks and amendments and considerations are looked at. But the main key is you're absolutely correct. The corporations in Silicon Valley, in the peninsula, the Googles, the Facebooks, they have to step up to the plate. They have to participate. They are bringing the jobs in. We've got to figure out a way to make that happen.
Just very quickly, co-authoring legislation to restore redevelopment agencies. It was the single greatest source of funding for affordable housing. The problem is when redevelopment agencies were dissolved, the monies were dispersed among taxing entities. The education community doesn't want to see a return to and restoration of redevelopment agencies because that would draw money away from schools. So the gentleman is a teacher. That education community is resisting changes to the way things were before redevelopment agencies.
All right, over here.
Yeah.
Question?
Yes. Real quick, I just want to say sorry for interrupting your private Costco shopping the other week, but thank you for talking to me. But my question is that after McConnell's tax bill, a lot of the tax burden has been shifted to the middle class, specifically in blue states with the SALT cap. And corporations were given a choice as to what to do with the money. They could have given it to employees, but instead they did stock buybacks. So my question is, can we tax the rich? Can we do marginal tax rates like AOC has been proposing for the Green New Deal to help with more practical matters like development of housing?
So I voted against the tax cut. Elections have consequences. If we want to restore taxes on the rich and corporations at a level that is appropriate, then we need a transformation in the White House. It's that simple.
In the early 2000s, Peninsula Interfaith Action did a deep dive into the subject of developing church land for affordable housing. One of the realities we encountered is that congregations wanted a say over who lived there, often asking whether or not they could prioritize their parishioners. So I know affordable housing tax credits are a problem in that regard, but you know we've heard talk of the community college district. So my question is whether the community college district or some hybrid of that would offer would accommodate the need to prioritize your parishioners.
So is Ron still here? I believe, and correct me again if I'm wrong, they didn't use tax credits. So that's why they had the ability, they had the land.
It's a certificate of participation, so it's a very specific kind of financing that the districts can use, it's special districts, and they are restricting their land to use by their employees specifically for their mission. When you use public funding like the low-income housing tax credit and home and CDBG, which pretty much we have to use to make these projects work, you have to abide by fair housing law, and fair housing law says that you cannot have any special categories beyond those that the governor of a state and the federal government have deemed to be acceptable. So, urgency for homeless people. You can have certain kinds of preferences at the state level, but you cannot do, we're just going to rent housing to these people who go to this church. It
But
just
would the community
doesn't work.
college district model work for churches? That was the question.
You would have to privately finance the redevelopment with church money. So that's the challenge, and I think that's where the rub comes, because there's not enough money to make that work.
Well, except that you do have the land, and the land is one of the biggest costs in terms of financing. So if you could find, venture money, is that what we're talking about there?
Yeah, or private funding of some sort. So what we've done when we've worked with nonprofits that want to have a special set aside, is we've actually really worked with them to get their populations ready for the application process. And so we've actually done a lot of work to make sure that you're marketing in the geography that the organization is based in, that you're reaching out to people so that they know the applications are coming. And there's always this notion that everybody, I live in Oakland so I can say this, everybody's gonna move from Oakland to San Mateo to take these units. That's not the case, because most people wanna live in Oakland because they work closer to Oakland. And so I think this challenge of, it's the whole neighborhood that would normally queue up first, and it might not just be the parishioners. And I think the challenge really is, as soon as you touch this with public money, you have to abide by fair housing law. It's just the way it works for us.
Okay, next question.
Yes. Will there be oversight over these religious, faith-based housing groups, developers? Because I was forced to file a HUD complaint against Mercy Housing, not to embarrass you, but HUD and the California Department of Fair Employment have come in. There's a lack of, can we have more oversight over faith-based, because the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender community are being excluded, and here we're hearing parishioners have priority. So could we have more transparency on protecting members of the LGBT community? Thank you.
So if the bill we passed the House yesterday, the Equality Act, gets passed, discrimination based on LGBTQ status will not be tolerated anywhere, for housing, for employment, for anything. So that's where we have to go. But okay, all right, next.
Hi, thanks for listening. I wanted to point out, I appreciate all the efforts that everybody's making, but I think the same thing is happening with affordable care, that nobody's really talking about the price. I'm opening up a discussion to think about whether or not housing should be subject to the simple laws of supply and demand. We're just putting a Band-Aid on it, which create more and more. I know there's a huge demand and we need more housing, but people are gouging. I have all my loved ones and friends are getting kicked out of their apartments, so that opportunistic landlords are able to triple, quadruple the land. Where I have people paying, I'll finish, please. $3,500 for a one-bedroom apartment, or people that were spending $1,700 getting kicked out so that somebody else who can afford $3,500. Houses that are getting bought and resold just for opportunistic. I would argue that the housing market is broken, and it's not subject to the normal laws of supply and demand. And
and you have a question?
I have I wonder if you guys would start, if there's a possibility to start, if there's ways to cool this market by, I know Canada will not let investors do this, and I know we have a capitalistic society, but there is nobody in the housing market buying and selling that has an incentive to keep the price down. Even the government. I have to move out of this area when I retire because my property tax is going to be more than my mortgage was. Even though I pay my mortgage and I will have it paid off by the time I'm ready to retire, my property tax will be more than that, and I will have to move anyway. There's no cap on any of this.
Okay.
So I would just ask Assemblymember Mullin to talk about the anti-gouging legislation in the Assembly, because I actually think the Assembly is trying to take some steps this year to cap some rents in the markets. I think California is paying attention to this. So AB 1482 for anti-gouging, and I know several of us have worked on this, and I think the governor is signaling strongly that he understands that this has to be fixed.
I actually think cities can take steps locally to create anti-gouging. And, you know, I can hear the sadness in the last questioner's voice, and there is a lot of greed associated with the increase of rents. The efforts to create rent stabilization have not succeeded that have been attempted in this county. And so it really requires, I think, the local city councils to step up and find mechanisms to help people stay in their homes. We did invite Matthew Desmond to speak to all the members of the local city councils last year. He wrote the book Evicted, and he makes a very compelling case that you can keep people from being evicted, you can keep them from that horrible death spiral into poverty. And the way you do that is either negotiating with the landlord or through a program that you create locally, or in many cases the evictions are illegal and then you challenge them in court. And you also create wraparound services so that people can learn how to manage their money and their resources. And he did a project like that in Boston, and the result was 4 years later, all those people that would have been evicted were still living in their homes. So that can happen. Yes.
And another element to this is in San Mateo County, most of our affordable stock that's left is family owned. It's small scale. I know this through my work with the Housing Authority. Most of the landlords that participate in the Housing Authority program for vouchers, small mom and pop landlords, they've owned their properties for decades, and there's going to be a generational turnover of that stock. And I think the banks have a part to do with this as well, because when these properties sell at the high market rate, the banks require the new buyer to show an income stream from the rents, and that leads to displacement financially. I don't know why the banks are underwriting at those high levels. There should be something that would cool the market a little bit that way too.
Oh, that's a good idea. All right, now we're going to shift gears and move on to the Peninsula Healthcare District, which has how many acres, Dennis?
We have 6 acres that are going to be included in the wellness community.
All right, so let me ask the first question. I'm sure everyone else, the experts, I think, probably have a lot of questions they want to ask. My understanding is that most of the housing is going to be for seniors at market rates. And since the healthcare district is a taxpayer district, the land that you have is owned by the taxpayers of the district, why wouldn't you be looking at some of the opportunities that have been suggested here in terms of making the use of the land for housing more affordable?
Well, thanks for the question. There's kind of 2 questions in there, so I'll unbundle it. The first question, well, the second question of why aren't we looking into that? The answer is we are looking into that. I'm proud to say that the board is working with the developer to increase the number of affordable units. We started this project with 10% affordable, which was more than Burlingame required, which was 0 affordable. To understand the project, you have to go back to its formulation. And this was not started as a housing project. Before I joined the board, I joined in 2013, but in the early to mid-2000s, the board was already planning on what to do with the land that the hospital used to sit on, that you were so instrumental about preserving the land back in the day. And looking at demographics, looking at the health surveys that are put out by the hospital government organizations every 3 years, it was determined that there would be what they termed the silver tsunami. The baby boom generation was getting older. There weren't enough services to provide for that number of elderly people. And so the idea was that we would create a campus near the hospital where our district is 200,000 people. So the number one problem with the elderly is isolation, loneliness, lack of socialization. These people sit up in their houses or apartments, and they don't socialize. And so how do we get those people to live a more vibrant life, especially after they have a medical condition that limits their ability to get out and about by themselves? So we identified a bunch of services that our 200,000 constituents would be able to go to the site to enjoy, to experience. The problem was those services are very expensive.
Can I interrupt you for one
Sure.
moment? You said 200,000. Those are the 200,000 taxpayers in the district.
Correct.
And you're
210.
So how does that break down in terms of age? Well, you're focused on the senior population, but you have
Correct.
200,000 taxpayers. What percentage of them are seniors
I
versus...
don't have, Cheryl Fama, who's here, might be able to give you the exact number. The basic idea was that the baby boom generation is the largest demographic generation. They were all going to be aging. We wanted to provide services, so how to pay for it, because it was without raising a bond or that thing. When we talked to the experts in aging and services for the elderly, they talked about this concept called aging in place. And that's the idea where you have independent living when you're doing pretty good. Something happens medically, you need assisted living. You move up to a heightened level of care at the place. Maybe you get dementia. We just built a 120-bed dementia unit across the street on Truesdale. And so a whole campus of aging in place, whereas as someone's needs increase, their medical needs, they don't have to move away. They just, the services are already at the location. Now the market rate housing came into place. We searched for organizations that did those kind of services well. And our asset was the land. By having those services on the campus and also including market rate housing, the market rate housing throws off enough income to provide free to very low income, very low cost services to the general public. So the market rate housing came later. It was a means to an end to provide the social services to the seniors that we wanted at the campus. Even so that it was a a revenue-generating idea that would not require raising taxes, we were still dedicated from the get-go to have 10%, and the idea was, as the rents increase over the years, our ability to subsidize other people would increase as the...
Is it true that the market rate price would be $4,000 a month?
We haven't seen any numbers. What we're doing with the developers is we're going at the community's urging. We're working with them to increase the number of affordable units, and we put this out for public bid. We said we want these, after meeting with consultants and planning for years, we said we want this menu of services for the people. That's our main goal. And then we need some housing to pay for those services. 10% of the housing has to be low income. We also wanted a medical office building for medical research on the aging process, how to improve people's quality of life as they age, which would also produce rents, which we're the government, so all the rents that we get from the land go back into the services for the general public. So instead of building an apartment building with 400 people, we're providing a campus for our 200,000 people, and we had presentation from local companies like Lyft, who actually are talking about specially trained drivers to bring the shut-ins over to the campus. And it's it's really an exciting, innovative project that has received national attention. As we increase the number of affordability, that has an effect on the services that we provide. And so right now, we're looking at the finances to maximize the affordable units from the get-go, but still be able to provide the services.
Senator Hill?
Thank you. Dennis, thanks for being here today. Just a couple of questions. One, have you, and I know this project and the planning for the proposal goes back a number of years, but how was the outreach to the community to determine that this was actually the need that the community felt was appropriate for that land? I mean, going back, and Jackie and I, when the hospital was there and the negotiations with Sutter over the lease and the other arrangements, what was the driving factor or force behind this particular? And you mentioned the aging in place and the gray tsunami and things. So that's the first. Perhaps you could answer that.
Okay, that's a great question. This was a data-driven initiative. This was. There are technical reports done all over the United States looking at various geographical areas. It's done by a county, actually, one of the main ones. And every 3 years, government health leaders, private hospitals, insurance companies, they all get together and they identify what are the health issues in a particular area. And so those kind of studies were very important. Our county has not only the oldest population in California, but one of the oldest, I think it's the oldest in the United States, or within the top 10. And so that was termed a silver tsunami. And so we did outreach and we did town halls. The issue, we're a little special district. We're a creature of statute by the California legislature creates. We have limited authority. It's basically these things were created to build hospitals after World War II, not free clinics, hospitals that charged and ran in the black. And so we're trying to do this senior project to be sustainable. The specific question as to how it came about, there were town halls. We tried to reach out into the newspaper. It's a funny thing. For many of our meetings, the first few years I was on the board, nobody came, or 1 or 2 people came. Since Representative Speier has brought attention to the affordable housing issue, we'll have 10 or 15 speakers coming. And we're listening, and we're trying to do our share. Our tax revenue from property tax is about $6 or $7 million a year, compared with the county's budget of $3 billion, $2 billion of which goes to general fund. And so that's with a B. So we're doing the best we can with our limited resource. Our main resource is the land. And because it's such a uniquely situated piece of land right next to that beautiful new hospital, we're trying, our idea was to provide heightened level of medical services for seniors and social services for seniors.
But the expectation is that they're going to come from other places to this wellness center. Is that right?
From our district, yes. The nearest senior, fairly large senior facility in our county, in Foster City, there's the JCC, which does a pretty good job. This is going to be more robust than that, more services.
Dennis, if I could just follow up with one question, and I remember a couple of years ago, the district asked me to carry legislation on to allow you the design-build aspect for your construction and for your project.
And thank you.
As you know, that legislation was kind of morphed into an Assemblymember Aguilar Curry's legislation that says if the district does provide housing and uses design-build, you have to provide 20% of that housing as affordable. Is it your intent to still go forward with a design-build type of project?
We cannot, the design-build legislation that you really worked hard to get for us, and I appreciate that. That was actually, we went to you for that to build the Truesdale 120-bed memory care facility, and by the time the legislation came through, we already had to go forward, and we weren't able to use the design build. For a project the size that we're talking about, the 6 acres, figure that could be a $500 million project. We have 210,000 constituents. 60% of people in San Mateo County are homeowners. If we were to assess go for a tax, that would be $4,000 per property owner. We felt that was politically probably not going to happen. So the question is, how do you build this beautiful campus without raising taxes? Due to Representative Speier and Jerry, your involvement back in the late 90s, early 2000s, when Peninsula Hospital was torn down to build a nice earthquake-safe facility, some healthcare districts, when they went through that process, sold off their land. Due to your leadership and the board's decision at the time, our district kept that land.
Well, yeah, you went from getting paid $1 a year to getting $3 million a year.
And that's still below market rent, but it's better than the $1, right? And that's thanks to you. And so, the question is, I forgot the question.
The question is, are you, the design build, the 20%
Oh, the design
requirement,
build.
if you
Okay,
use
so
design
how
build,
to
you have
build
to.
for it. So we can't build it ourselves. We don't want to sell the land to a developer because that's public land. And so the idea was to do a long-term lease of 65 to 75 years. That's the same period that the Peninsula Hospital has been leased to Sutter, 50 years plus 25 years. It started about 10 years ago. So with that long-term lease, all that land from El Camino up to Marco Polo will become available back to when we're all dead and gone in 75 years, that land will be public land. In the meantime, we can lease it to a developer. They build it on their dime, their risk. They pay rent. That rent we put right back into the senior services at the community, and we're getting this.
Okay.
So that's the idea.
Sister Amy Bayley, I think, is very anxious to ask a question.
It's probably way down the line. It's such a missed opportunity to not have had. I mean, a nonprofit developer functions in the exact same way. So it's a prepaid lease, it's 75 years, you do 100% affordable. And for a half an acre, it feels like a missed opportunity. And I don't know, I would encourage you, unless it's really, I don't know how far down the line it is, any nonprofit developer would be able to have a conversation where you could do, because you would also pull out the tax piece, where you could really succeed in a significantly higher low income.
Well,
Yeah.
I appreciate the comment, and I want to let everybody know this was a request for a proposal that was publicly put. We're a public entity. We can't just do no bid contracts like Representative Speier is fighting against at the military. This was a public process. In fact, one of the large nonprofits in our county actually came to a recent meeting at and said that they had, I think it was MidPen actually, had said that they had looked at our project hard. They wanted to do it, but the services that we wanted to have provided at the site were just kind of beyond their scope.
But let me ask you this, though, Dennis. You set out a proposal that you wanted a high-rise medical building and some housing and a wellness center. But if you had offered the land for housing in general, you would have had a whole different setting, would you not?
Well, yes, if we did something else, there would be a different result. But again, our purpose, the goal was to provide senior services, a broad range. And it is possible for groups to partner with other groups. The developers that responded to the request for proposal, all of those who responded were actually conglomerates of, housing people, office building people who got together and said, let's work together and put in a proposal.
Who wants the office building?
What do you mean, who?
Well, where did the idea that put an office building there? Is this something that Sutter wants, and so you're accommodating Sutter on this?
No, Sutter is our tenant.
On the other part?
On the other property. This is not, although the office building came about because we wanted the research component of aging.
We have over 200 companies in South San Francisco alone doing biotech and research. We have one company led by Art Levinson, the former CEO of Genentech, that's now being funded through Google to just do research on senior diseases. So what would make you think that there's value added in using that land for that purpose?
Well, the idea that because one company is doing some research at one location, therefore we don't need any other research, I think is not right. I think the overall scheme was to bring a bunch of different elements related to aging all into one place so that you create a dynamic of having our constituents there receiving services. You have facilities for aging in place. You have scientists there studying how people are aging. And you just have a real unique, innovative plan that is actually being nationally lauded. People are telling us they're keeping an eye on this, and that this is exactly what we need. We're so happy you are doing this.
Did you look at other models for service provision? The county is a leader in partnering with affordable housing providers to really reduce the burden that this county has in their health care costs. We have seen in our communities in Half Moon Bay, also in East Palo Alto, Menlo Park, Foster City, that we reserve a portion of the homes, about 10 or 20%, for the frail elderly, teaming up with the health plan. And through that, we are able to take somebody who's overhoused, costing the county maybe $60,000 to $120,000 per year, bring that housing subsidy down to $12,000 to $15,000, and then bring in home supportive services and a variety of other. And my colleague here is really kind of looking at the aging in place definition to say, you know, that this county does this very well. We find it to be innovative, and to not cost anywhere near some of the models that when we have studied that, because yes, I'm from MidPen Housing, and we did look at this site very carefully, and the model of services provision is something that I think really is also a missed opportunity to take a look at what this county is doing really well.
I would also say that in the request for whatever kind of proposals, I don't think there was a requirement or even a range requirement for how much affordable housing would be part of that.
That's not true.
Piece. Okay.
There was 10% mandatory. And when the local laws required 0, our hope is to provide more. And I rest assured, we're looking at that right now. It's a balancing act of what services are going to be provided, what facilities are going to be provided open to the public versus the subsidizing of the housing.
Okay,
As
all right.
time goes by.
I have one kind of comment that's a 10,000-foot comment about
Okay.
this. So at the federal level, when you surplus federal military bases, you have a requirement that 25% of all the housing be built to help mitigate the issue of homelessness and affordable housing. The state and the governor has issued an executive order that is doing an inventory of all the sites that might be available for housing that the state owns. It suggests to me, and with all due respect to the district, that special districts should also have some kind of rule around them that if it's going to be housing, that the state should at least say 25% should be affordable, that there should be some boundaries set, because I think surplus land, whether it's federally owned or state owned or special district owned, it's really huge for this. It's a big piece of the solution. And so, I know there's several bills in the legislature that are pending. Jim Bell has a bill on the Senate side that are looking at what to do here. And so I would say there's a space here to do some setting of boundaries to encourage more affordable housing. And I think the federal government is a great place to look because they've done it with a lot of how they've surplus some of their larger sites. I think you can set the guidelines for that at the state level for all of these districts, and I think it would make a big difference and really put direction out.
Okay, if there are any questions in the audience, we're way over already, and I really appreciate everyone for staying. We're going to take like 5 questions, so if you're interested, and Dennis, you can finish just a minute. I just want to make sure we'll take 5 questions. We appreciate everyone's participation. Dennis, you wanted to go ahead?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I mentioned we're a creature of statute. We're limited by statute. Mostly we have to provide medical services. The senior housing is expressly authorized in the in the authorizing legislation, but we are not authorized to do affordable housing in general.
Well, that can be
So
changed by statute.
It could. We're a creature of statute, but as I sit here, we're a healthcare district, not a housing district. And
But I could make the case that if someone's homeless and giving them housing is going to improve their health.
It's very well established that that housing is one of the primary determinants of health. That is known by everybody.
Okay, all right, questions?
My name's Carol, and I'm a realtor in this community, and I'm aware that at the time that the decision was made about this development, it was in the wake of the foreclosure crisis when prices were in decline, both rents and home prices. Since then, the home prices have risen steeply to the point where people can not only not thrive, but in some cases they can't even survive. So my question is, given the change in the environment, how is this project responsive to our current community needs?
we still have seniors that are aging that are going to need the social services. Remember, the housing component of the project was a means to an end. It was a means to finance all the other programs.
Yeah, and
facilities.
I have a comment about those services. So it seems like the whole concept of this depends on the superior need for these services. So I think that a lot of these services are duplicative. I have driven the area, and across the street there's a yoga studio. Across the street there are 4 cafes. There's a library right down the street. Millbrae will build a new rec center that has meeting rooms. The library is right there. So how is it that, I think that, to prioritize these services over affordable housing, to me it seems like it's all upside down.
So again, by statute, we're not affordable housing is not in our authorization. To the extent that we're doing affordable housing for seniors, we're looking. It would be my hope that they would be medically needy seniors.
Hi, my name is Mike Dunham. I'm part of a group, Housing for All Burlingame. Nice to see you, Dennis. That has been following this project for a while. And one of the things that struck me most at the last town hall is we asked the developers, could they do this exact project on private land? And they said the answer is yes. That the only impediment is a large enough parcel, and the healthcare district happens to own one. So actually, I want to direct this question to the affordable housing developers. If you had access to these 6 acres under a 75-year ground lease, or even 1 or 2 or 3 acres, what is the sort of project for seniors that could be built, and at what levels of affordability, and what sort of services could you provide?
Retirement programs is only one.
So we have a 66-unit apartment right next to City Hall in Foster City. It's on half an acre. It's a very impactful community on only half an acre. You could certainly scale that up a little bit bigger, but the typical financing around here would be that the Housing Authority may offer vouchers for approximately 50%. And then we would look to if there was other city money, and there's also some state funding available. And this site scores beautifully for 9% tax credits. We have not had an application for the last 2 rounds in this community for 9% tax credits, so they're right now, for other reasons. But I think that this one would be, we would be able to finance this, and that it is the size of the parcel that we would need to have a real impact would allow everything else to go on.
Next question.
You've mentioned that you are not an affordable housing developer. However, you've acknowledged that you can build senior housing and that you can build workforce housing. So you can build both of those in 100% affordability if you wanted to. My question is, given that You keep referencing working with the developers. Given that the RFP was not written in a way that attracted affordable developers to understand how they could play a role on this land, and given that there is still no contract with these developers and there's only a negotiating agreement, why won't you scrap the plan, rewrite the RFP, and actually see what you could do to build 100% affordability for seniors and workforce?
Right now, we're in a exclusive negotiating agreement. Every contract has a duty of good faith and fair dealing, and we are negotiating in good faith. We are talking to the developer about increasing the number of affordable units while still providing the other services. I think the board's decision when they did this was not to build a few hundred units for a few hundred people, but to build a campus where thousands of people could come and have enriched lives and have medical facilities and social programs that address their needs as older people.
Thank you. Next question.
First, I would just like to say to Mr. Zell that I take exception to your reference to the people that you hope to serve as those people, as opposed to our seniors. These people, our seniors, are part of our community that we're hoping that we're hoping to serve, that you're hoping to serve, I would hope. And going back to the earlier part of today's conversation, the community that we're hoping to serve, the children, the families, these are our families. And as taxpayers, these are our people. So the question that I would like to ask is concerning the research component that you're proposing. How much space, how much physical space do you propose that would take? And if you were to eliminate that, how much of that could be converted over to affordable housing? And I would just suggest that if you collaborate with UCSF researchers, with Stanford researchers, and just share data, all of that space already exists. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And our seniors, this campus is being built for our seniors. The idea was to create a synergy where all of these activities could occur. I note that land can be bought by other governmental entities too. I'm sure if you go looking, you can buy some land. The county has $3 billion. We have $6 million. We're trying to do the best program we can, the best campus we can with what we have for our seniors.
Hi, so I first just want to thank Congresswoman Speier for putting on this event and for your long history on your work with housing. This is just briefly from a 1981 article. Ms. Speier told the group of about 50 people that the county cannot afford divisiveness in coming up with a solution to what she termed its horrendous housing problem. That was 3 decades ago. And she also talked about the fact that there is a serious housing jobs imbalance, which, if unchecked, will drive industry and young people from the county. Look where we are decades and decades later, it's the same place. But my question is for Mr. Zell, and that's really, this project will add 250,000 square feet of office space. That's roughly, based on current estimates, between 1,000 and 1,500 new jobs. These people won't be able to live in these units that you're building. So at a time when the county has a horrendous housing jobs imbalance, how can we possibly say that going forward with this plan, which would worsen this imbalance at a time when we need to be building more housing than office space, how can we possibly go through with this? Thank you.
The idea of the office building and the scientists studying aging, first of all, I'm not sure I agree with your premise that it's going to be all new scientists from outside the area. Maybe it will attract more. The focus on our campus is, I get it, it's undeveloped land. There are other special districts. The Mid-Peninsula Open Space District has 69,000 acres of open land. There's 640 acres in a square mile, so that's 100 square miles of land that is open space. It's hard for me to believe that there isn't some of that land on the edges that could also be used. The idea to keep the open space open is a value judgment. I support open space, but in a crisis, you know, the amount of attention our project is getting with our 6 acres versus other special districts that have 69,000 acres, and the fact that the reason our project is being built where it is because it's right next to a hospital where our seniors are going to be able to receive the services and social programs. There's lots of factors which dictate why that's there. With respect to the office building, again, it's that synergy of real people living real lives but being studied as they live to find out ways to improve quality of life for everybody.
There's a question by Assemblyman Mullin.
I think really more of a comment. Thank you, Congresswoman. And I'm pleased to hear that the district is willing to provide more affordable housing. My sense is that state law is not necessarily precluding the district from providing more. If we need a legislative council opinion, I can certainly request that. If you need legislation clarifying the nexus between healthcare improvement and housing, I stand ready, willing, and able to carry that legislation forward. So you have my commitment on that.
I appreciate it, and it's not as if, you know, one of the comments had to do with homelessness, and we have worked with Samaritan House. They came to us with a project called Tiny Houses, and this was 3 or 4 years ago, we expressed willingness to fund a purchase of land to try that project, and they're still looking. It's not as though we're not interested in helping organizations like Samaritan House that help the homeless. It's just more of a question. This particular site is for the elderly.
Well, it doesn't have to be, though. Can I just, first of all, Dennis, I want to say thank you. You've taken a lot of questions.
Well, thank you for having us. It's a discussion worth having.
And you've been very gracious, so I want to thank you. But can I just, for everyone's benefit, I just want to read the 2 code sections. Health and Safety Code 32-121, to establish, maintain, and operate or provide assistance in the operation of one or more health facilities or health services, including but not limited to outpatient programs, services, and facilities, retirement programs, services, and facilities, chemical dependency programs, services, and facilities, or other healthcare programs, services, and facilities, and activities at any location within or without the district for the benefit of the district and the people served by the district. To establish, maintain, and operate or provide assistance in the operation of free clinics diagnostic and testing centers, health education programs, wellness and prevention programs, rehabilitation, aftercare, and any other healthcare service provider groups and organizations that are necessary for the maintenance of good physical and mental health in the communities served by the district. My plea to you is, you have focused on our senior community. I think you are leaving out 2/3 of the rest of our community in this proposal. Now, and I don't know all the numbers, but I would say that you have focused in on seniors when the district provides funding. The district has taxpayers that are providing funding to the district, and while they probably would be happy to have some money go towards seniors, I think looking at providing services to a larger group, and if this, it's such a prime piece of property in a residential area close to El Camino and close to transportation, that it seems that if we could be doing good for everyone by changing a word or two to add housing, affordable housing, it would benefit everybody, including seniors.
Well, let me address that, because I don't want anybody to think we're a one-trick pony and that this is our only project. We have the dental clinic, we have the memory care facility. The other project I'm personally working on, along with Director Galligan, who's here, are mental health clinics. We're in the well along in the early planning stages of community mental health clinics for young people between the ages of 18 and 24, the age when most mental health issues occur. We are planning to build and operate in conjunction with Stanford University's program and a startup they're doing called Alcove, clinics that are walk-in clinics, whether you have insurance or not, whether you're a county charge or not. You walk in, you say, I have a problem. You're immediately triaged. Is this a serious problem that you need to see a clinician for? Or is this something that could be handled in group therapy? Or do you just need someone to talk to? So it's
and where is that going to be?
We're looking for real estate. We just went out Thursday looking for real estate. We have some locations that I can't disclose because it's a matter of closed session. But it's going to be in next year's budget that we're preparing. The service is integrated, which means you walk in there, it's not just mental health. People with mental health problems often have housing problems, often have job problems, often have family problems. All those type of services are going to be in the hub. And it's also stepped, which means if you need a low level of care, we can provide that at a low level cost. If you need a higher level of care, you do that. So we are looking at these issues. It was felt that, especially with the homeless population, that combining the homeless issue, homeless facilities at the same location as seniors, we don't want heroin addicts running around at there. We're going to do these separately, where there's transportation and that are in the middle of our communities where the services can be provided. Someone here commented that it was a 5-year project. This project has been in the planning stage for 10 years. Every time we go back, like we are doing, to increase affordable housing for seniors, not for general public, but for seniors, and probably more specifically for medically needy seniors. it slows it down. And so these other projects we're doing are separate, and they're just as valid, just as important, but they're just a different project at a different place.
Okay. All right. Okay, yes, go ahead. Reverend Goetz.
You caught me off guard when you equated heroin addicts with the homeless population.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I
cringed
I
too.
live and serve in Redwood City, and the number of mobile homes that are lining our streets, I think that actually housing homeless people and seniors together in affordable housing would be an excellent moral response and allow community to build and care for each other.
Well, you try to get that through the Burlingame Planning Commission.
All right. Well, this has been very helpful, I think, for us to have this conversation. And it is a conversation about America. And I think it's important, and Dennis, I know the frustration you may have in terms of the planning process, but when the planning started 10 years ago, this was a different county than it is today.
We're listening.
Our needs are different, and we have to be in government, and you're in government, flexible to accommodate the needs as we see them today. So I appreciate you being here very much. I appreciate each and every one of you being here, and to my colleagues, Don Horsley, Dave Pine, Jerry Hill, and Kevin Mullin. We thank you all for joining us, and again, to our experts in the housing field, it's Nevada, isn't it? Nevada Merriman, Sister Amy Bayley, Linda Mandolini, and Reverend Goetz. We thank you. Again, to you, Mr. Zell, thank you for being here. And finally, to you, Ken Cole, the oracle of all housing knowledge, we thank you for joining us today. Goodbye, everyone.